There's a man who almost never appears in the history books, and the reason he doesn't is one of the strangest cover-ups in ancient history. His name was Diviciacus. He was a Druid, a Celtic high priest with knowledge of astronomy, law, medicine, and the gods. He traveled to Rome in 63 BCE, walked the halls of power, and convinced the Senate to take him seriously. Cicero hosted him personally. And then, a few years later, he became the closest ally of the man who would conquer his entire world, Julius Caesar. Caesar called him the one person in whom he had absolute confidence. And then, Caesar wrote a book about the Druids, a detailed, careful, fascinated account, and never once used the word Druid to describe his best friend. Why? That question is what this video is really about. But to answer it, we need to go back to the conquest. Caesar invaded Gaul in 58 BCE. What followed was 8 years of systematic destruction. Armies crushed, villages burned, 1 million people killed, and another 1 million enslaved by some estimates. By the time it was over, Caesar had reshaped an entire continent and made himself the most powerful man in Rome. But buried inside his war journals, in Book 6 of Bello Gallico, he stopped the military narrative cold, and he started writing about the Druids. Not as enemies, not as barbarians, as something that genuinely fascinated him. These weren't simple village priests. Druids were religious leaders, judges, political advisors, doctors, historians, and teachers, all in one. Caesar identified them as one of the two most powerful classes in all of Gallic society, alongside the nobles. They could stop battles mid-fight. They settled legal disputes between rival tribes. And if anyone defied their rulings, they had the ultimate weapon, excommunication from all religious sacrifice. In Celtic society, that made you an outcast. No one would speak to you. No one would touch you. Caesar was taking notes. So what exactly was he writing down? The first thing he wanted to understand was their science. Caesar recorded that Druids studied the stars and their movements, the size of the cosmos, and the earth, the natural world, and the power of the gods. Roman readers probably assumed that was flattery or exaggeration, the kind of thing you say about a conquered people to make your victory feel more significant. Then, in 1897, archaeologists dug up a field in southern France and found a bronze tablet nearly 5 feet wide. It was the Coligny calendar, a sophisticated lunisolar calendar written in the Gaulish language, spanning 62 months, tracking festivals like Beltane and Samhain with extraordinary precision. It confirmed exactly what Caesar had claimed, word for word, almost 2,000 years earlier. These people understood celestial mechanics at a level that Rome took seriously. The second thing Caesar documented was their philosophy, and this one stopped Roman readers cold. The Druids taught that the soul doesn't die. After death, it passes from one body into another. Transmigration, reincarnation. And they didn't treat this as comforting mythology. They used it as a practical military doctrine. Caesar noted it specifically. This belief, by robbing death of all its terrors, produced the highest form of human courage. For a general who had watched Gallic warriors charge Roman legions with what he could only describe as terrifying fearlessness, that detail mattered. He wasn't just documenting a religion. He was trying to understand a battlefield advantage. But here's what Caesar never fully admits. The third thing he was studying was the most important of all. The Druids held an annual assembly in the territory of the Carnutes, considered the geographic center of Gaul, where they settled disputes from every tribe across the entire region. They had a single elected leader. No other ancient writer, not Pliny, not Tacitus, not Strabo, credited the Druids with anything close to this. Caesar alone described what was essentially a unified national institution operating across tribal boundaries. That's not a priesthood, that's a government. And Caesar, who was in the business of conquering governments, needed to understand exactly how it worked. Which brings us back to Diviciacus. Think about what this man actually was. A Druid, meaning he had spent up to 20 years in oral training, memorizing the accumulated knowledge of Celtic civilization. He was educated enough to address the Roman Senate. He was persuasive enough that Cicero, one of the greatest intellects in Roman history, wrote about him with genuine respect. Cicero recorded that Diviciacus claimed deep knowledge of nature, made predictions through augury, and practiced what the Greeks called physiologia, the science of the natural world. And Caesar made him his most trusted Gallic ally. Now read Caesar's chapters on the Druids again with that in mind. The science, the philosophy, the political structure. Caesar had a living expert sitting across the table from him, a man who had been trained in all of it, and he's describing that knowledge in careful, respectful detail. He just never connects the two. Caesar writes about Diviciacus, the political ally. He writes about the Druids, the institution. He never lets them touch. The man who defined the Druids for all of Western history quietly erased the Druid he actually knew from the record. Why would he do that? Historian Ronald Hutton argued that Caesar's account of the Druids wasn't neutral documentation. It was a constructed narrative. Caesar deliberately portrayed them as both civilized and savage, learned enough that absorbing Gaul into the empire felt like cultural progress, but barbaric enough in their alleged practices to justify Roman force. Caesar himself described their most infamous ritual: human sacrifices burned alive inside massive wicker structures. Whether that was accurate, exaggerated, or invented entirely, it served a rhetorical purpose. It cast the Druids as people who needed to be stopped. And here's the irony that should stop you completely. Caesar wrote all of this while holding Rome's highest religious office. He was the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Roman religion. The man documenting Celtic religious practices as barbarism was himself the head of a state religion that also involved animal sacrifice, ritual augury, and consulting the gods before every major military decision. He understood religious power better than almost anyone alive, and he understood exactly what he was doing with his pen. When Rome eventually suppressed the Druids in the 1st century CE, Suetonius Paulinus attacking their last stronghold on the island of Anglesey in 60 CE, nearly everything they knew was lost. Their doctrine had forbidden writing. All their knowledge lived in human memory, passed down through oral transmission across training that took up to 20 years. When the people died, the knowledge died with them. What survived is almost entirely filtered through the words of the man who conquered them. Caesar wanted their knowledge, their astronomy, their philosophy, their political architecture. He studied it, recorded it, and used it to understand how to hold an empire together. But somewhere in that process, he made a choice. He separated the institution from the individual. He described the Druids in the abstract, while quietly concealing the one Druid whose knowledge had shaped his own understanding. Controlling the story of what the Druids knew turned out to be just as useful as knowing it, and the most powerful proof of that is the man you've probably never heard of, who traveled to Rome, impressed Cicero, trusted Caesar, and was then written out of the very chapters he helped to fill. Diviciacus the Druid, hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years.